Each year we give our meeting a theme, a thematic focus, and devote most of Sunday's session to that theme. And the themes have varied over the years. Some of you will remember, many of you will remember last year's theme, the informal economy, and looking backwards through the list, West, East, Dare to Care, Green Management. Some of you may remember all the way back to the anniversary, and what have we got here? Internationalizing the academy. Why do we have a theme? A theme creates something of a sense of community amongst such a vast, heterogeneous assemblage as we have here today, nearly 8,000 people. It can also be a prompt to reflect on some important topic. And sometimes that topic imposes itself on us through the power of events taking place around us. Sometimes it imposes on it seems like a good idea because it's an important theme that risks being overlooked by the division of intellectual labor that characterizes the way the academy works. Next year, the theme is going to be of that second type. Deborah Shapiro will be our program chair, and the theme next year, as some of you, I hope, are already aware, is the power of words. Deborah wants us to get thinking about the ways in which, how we say things, and the new media that are influencing the way in which we communicate our meanings, how those are shaping the impact of what we say on individuals, groups, organizations, and larger social structures. This seems like a very promising, exciting theme, and I'm looking forward to seeing all the interesting sessions that will result from your reflections on that topic. She's announced the theme early so that some of you may shape your research over the coming months in order to submit something related to what seems like a very exciting topic. This year, the theme is of that other kind, a theme that it seemed to me and to my colleagues with whom I shared the proposal, a theme that imposes itself on us by virtue of the changes taking place around us. It does seem that indeed capitalism is in question. Financial crisis unfolding around the world over these last decades, prolonged economic recession, depression, austerity characterizing many regions of the world, growing inequality in many countries around us, growing frustration of economic aspirations, mounting environmental crisis facing the planet, and then the proliferation of protest movements of various kinds, various parts of the world. Of course, there's many factors that contribute to these problems and the emergence of these protest movements. The causes are complex, and it does seem like a good idea to focus our attention on one element of that broader causal structure, namely the underlying political economic system we call capitalism. It seemed like a particularly appropriate theme since we're meeting at Disney World, and Disney World seems like such an extraordinary monument to both the wonderful and terrifying aspects of capitalism's impact on culture, work, city planning, our children's dream life. But this theme's a little different from some of the others, perhaps, that we've seen in previous years by asking us to focus on the broader context of management and of our research. And this broadening of our field of view may feel like a bit of a stretch. My sense of it is that when the context changes, when these contextual pressures mount, that inevitably changes what we research, what we teach, what our students are expecting us to help them understand. And that even if we don't feel by virtue of our backgrounds particularly well equipped to engage these broader issues, we're scholars after all, and we have the intellectual resources with which to broaden our own understanding of things. And in reality, we have in our midst many scholars who already have deep methodological and philosophical and theoretical resources with which to address these broader structural changes. Given the challenge of forming a theme program around such a topic, I needed a team of colleagues to help me, and so I reached out to people who I felt had unusual breadth of vision and depth of scholarship, and they worked with me over the course of the last year, and I wanted to begin by thanking them. Jerry Davis from Michigan, Tom Koken from the MIT Sloan School, Carrie Liana from the University of Pittsburgh, and Stella Nkomo from the University of Pretoria. We formed a team, and Lord knows these folks invested enormous parts of their lives to make this this theme possible for us. They reviewed a lot of submissions that came directly to our committee for PDWs and symposia. They took the lead in organizing several sessions that you see on the program today. And we also selected sessions that were nominated by the division and interest group program chairs from amongst the sessions that they had already accepted to be put on the Sunday All Academy theme program. I love that model. It seems like a terrific way to make sure that this thematic program on Sunday is integrated with the life of your divisions, and I'm hoping you feel that way too at the end of the day. So I wanted to thank these 4 colleagues on my behalf, but on yours as well, for the work that they've done in helping put together this program. So, if capitalism in question is our theme, the first question surely is, what do we mean by capitalism? There's no obvious answer to that question. There's different theoretical perspectives one might bring to bear on this. I sought a fairly elementary, simple definition focused on 3 key structural features that seem to differentiate capitalism from previous, historically earlier systems of economics. So we have a market competition driving the behavior of firms. We have wage employment within those firms, and we have limited government control over the conduct of those firms. Those features of capitalism each come with very powerful benefits, especially in comparison with pre-capitalist economic systems. Market competition creates immense pressure on firms to innovate and respond. Wage employment within the firms allows workers to move between firms. Workers are not tied to any individual firm. And limited government over economic activity gives us a very valued freedom to produce what we want, sell what we want, buy what we want, to whomever we want. These same features, of course, come with some downsides, some risks, some costs. Market competition creates enormous pressure to innovate and respond, but on the other hand, markets themselves are not a very stable institutional form. They're rather crisis-prone. If we needed reminding, we might recall that some 10 million Americans have been evicted from their homes since 2007, when they were no longer able to afford their mortgages. The market's time horizons are necessarily rather short compared to the long-lived problems of environmental sustainability and even the time frame required to sustain a viable pension system. Firms that are under profit pressure, under a private property regime, don't pay much attention to either the positive or the negative externalities associated with their activities. These are pretty important downsides. The wage employment system gives workers the freedom to move between employers, and that's inestimably valuable for people coming from worlds in which they may have been bonded for life under a regime of slavery or feudal serfdom. But it does mean that unless you have the financial resources to start your own business, you're obliged, compelled to work for somebody else in exchange for a wage, to submit to some employer's authority. And that experience of submission, where a boss tells you what to do and how to do it, that experience of domination contrasts rather sadly with the experience of democracy in our political sphere. And second, it does seem that the system of wage employment creates a structural difference between revenues associated with wages and revenues associated with profits. And that seems to be leading to ever-widening gulf of inequality of wealth and income. And then finally, limited government over economic activity clearly has important benefits for our freedoms, but at the same time, that limited government restricts the ability of government to resolve some of the problems associated with either market competition or wage employment. It also means that the government has a limited capacity to express any collective will in shaping the direction of economic development. And in recent years, that's become a source of important political contention as we experience this period of prolonged recession and people demand of government that it step in to remedy that crisis. I would say, too, reflecting on the role of government in this capitalist structure, that even though the role of government in the conduct of economic affairs itself is very limited, and for which we're very grateful, it takes considerable government coercive force to sustain a system of private property and the resulting inequalities of wealth and income. And then finally, I'd say under this heading that the debates here are not just over the role of government, but also the process of government itself. If government doesn't control business, the evidence of many countries over recent decades seems to suggest that business ends up controlling government. And so limited government seems in many places to have become government limited to the service of business interests. So given these downsides, risks, costs of the capitalist structure, it's not surprising that in some countries, folks have moved away from the canonical competitive market, free market model, and we see a proliferation of varieties of capitalism that variously attempt to broaden the objectives of the firm to encompass social, economic, as well as environmental goals, deepen workers' participation in the management of their firms, strengthen the role of government in the conduct of economic affairs. To map these varieties, there's various ways of doing that. I've been using a little two-dimensional map. I'm not sure this quite does the job, but it's not a bad point of departure for our conversation, perhaps, where you might contrast systems based on whether it's more government-centered or more market-centered, whether we have more or less government control on that horizontal axis, and then on the vertical axis, what role community plays in the conduct of economic affairs. A more individualistic model of self-advancement or a more collective model based on community commitments. And we could perhaps map countries roughly, very roughly, somewhat contentiously on a map like this. It does seem like we might benefit all here in our research as management scholars from work by our colleagues in economics and political science on the varieties of capitalism. We're accustomed in our world of management to look at the effects of different national cultures on the way firms operate, on the experience of work by employees, on the strategies of firms. I think we could broaden our perspective to encompass the impact of these different political economic systems on those same sets of dependent variables. Of course, within any given country, there's scope for variation across regions, across industries, across firms. But these country-level factors, system factors, do seem to constrain that variation through the weight of inherited patterns of wealth distribution, the weight of established law and regulation, the weight of shared values and norms. And indeed, beyond the country-level constraints, there are international constraints at the supranational level, such as we see in the European Union, the World Trade Organization, the international financial markets. But given this limited success that these variants have had in resolving some of the downsides of a capitalist system, and while preserving capitalism's positive features, it's not surprising that debate continues and that there be proponents of more radical changes to the canonical free market system. We do see countries and political programs aimed at a more extensive, more radical transformation, pushing from a system based on competition between firms to collaboration, from a model based on wage employment to cooperative ownership, and one that would give government a far more extensive role in the conduct of economic affairs, moving towards some sort of planning model. And indeed, we could expand that first map so as to encompass a somewhat broader range of alternatives to capitalism as well as variants of capitalism. So adding perhaps state capitalism, state socialism, democratic socialism, cooperative models, and market socialist models. We could tentatively assign some sort of examples to illustrate some of these more radical departures from the canonical free market system. And again, forgive me if the placement of any of these options seems a little contestable, but that's the point. I think this is a discussion worth having. The experience of firms, of workers, of entire industries within these different economic systems, that's rich fodder for our reflection as management scholars, I think. Of course, faced with these proliferating alternatives to capitalism and variants of capitalism, proponents of a competitive market model have not remained silent. In recent years, we've seen an increasingly sophisticated intellectual debate about the virtues of a market process of the competitive free market system, arguing that government failures are perhaps more likely and more dangerous than market failures, arguing that stronger government, even if it promised faster economic growth, would undermine key freedoms, and arguing that stronger community, if that's the direction that you are arguing for, might happen at the expense of individual freedoms. So we find ourselves as management scholars under the weight of these contextual changes drawn into a grand debate. And it's a debate that brings us closer to the concerns of our colleagues in other social sciences, and indeed a debate that brings us closer to the concerns of our fellow citizens. Is capitalism the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama argued a little while ago? Is it perhaps the best system that humanity can imagine for itself, or the least bad system? Or is it perhaps rather, as Bertolt Brecht argued a while back, when he likened it to the failures of 20th century communism, arguing that the failures of the communist regimes of the 20th century were like the failures of the pioneers of flight, who invented very clumsy flying machines, crashed, often died, but successors to their experiments eventually found a way to make an aeroplane that did indeed fly and got us to Orlando. So our own research, our teaching, finds itself drawn into this discussion of a very broad and controversial set of issues at the level of systems and countries, where there's a host of research issues relative to the performance of different economic systems in the economic and non-economic domains. State capitalism, state socialism have been attractive ideas, propositions for developing countries looking for more rapid economic growth. We have sessions in our program here about how these models really perform on the economic dimension and whether they're capable of dealing better with the externalities associated with environmental and social problems. The competitive market model generates very high levels of innovation. We have an extensive body of research on the way market pressures stimulate innovation and in products and services, but also mounting concerns about the weight of the intellectual property system as a system of private property, operating perhaps as a dampening factor and an anti-commons. We have sessions here on the dynamics of innovation under these different systems. Under this broad heading of systems and countries, the dynamics of the reproduction and change of economic regimes seems also to be an important topic for us, based on the evidence that you see in the program on offer here today and over the next couple of days. Within and amongst countries, what are the institutional factors, economic, political, legal, cultural, and the social movements and actors that can resist or drive system change at this fundamental level? We have sessions here, you'll find them in your program, on the moral arguments involved, the pros and cons of capitalism as a system. We have speakers from across the spectrum, from the Cato Institute, the Ayn Rand Institute. We also have sessions with some very interesting senior union leaders. We have the Secretary General of the Secretary Treasurer of the AFL-CIO, Liz Schuler, with us, as well as two extraordinarily innovative union leaders working in healthcare and for the renovation of the entire American union movement. We have sessions on feminist critiques of capitalism, on the culture of capitalism, on changes in the Chinese form of capitalism, on indigenous people's responses to capitalism, on how capitalism encourages or discourages corruption, on how business schools might respond or might contribute to positive change rather than reproducing or exacerbating inequality. We have two sessions, one with a terrific group of thought leader deans, and two sessions with such thought leader deans, and one session with leaders of the two leading business school accrediting organizations. In terms of firms and fields, we have a host of issues that have been of long-standing interest for folks in our community around alternative governance structures for firms, governance structures that might incline firms to objectives beyond shareholder wealth maximization. We have sessions on the program around social and urban entrepreneurship. We have a session with Rumin Zhang, the CEO of the Chinese firm Haier, many of you have read about. We have sessions on the emergence of benefit corporations with leaders from that movement. Some of you may be aware that recently, in July, Delaware became the 19th state to authorize the creation of what we call B corporations, that is corporations that are allowed to incorporate but serving with bylaws that stipulate that they'll serve not only shareholders but also employees, communities, and the environment. We have sessions from CEOs in American firms that have declared themselves committed to a higher purpose. We have sessions on the new narratives of value creation. And we have several sessions on cooperatives. We have a full-length documentary feature film that'll be on display, and 2 sessions with authors of recent books on cooperatives as a model. Under that same general heading of firms and fields, we've also got a whole portfolio of sessions and research issues for you to reflect on concerning firms' market and non-market strategies, assessing the costs and the benefits to firms, but also to the broader society of firms' interventions in social and political affairs. We have several sessions on corporate social responsibility, environmental sustainability in both developing countries and advanced economies. Under that third heading of people and groups, this, of course, is a long-standing area of research interest for many of us, the effects of government policies and national cultures and systems of labor relations on the social and psychological experience of work. We have some terrific sessions on how capitalist institutional structures have contributed to the growing inequality of employment income, sessions on how people legitimize inequality from a social psychological point of view. As regards the quality and quantity of our non-work life, of course, many of us have been concerned for a long time with understanding how work responsibilities can colonize our non-work lives, but also how that work experience can enrich our non-work lives. We have some wonderful sessions here too on how mindfulness and other forms of forward-looking behavior can awaken people to their experience and enliven them to the possibilities of a better world. So we have some terrific debates ahead. I'm delighted to be able to offer you such a rich program, such a portfolio of contrasting and conflicting points of view. We have some 42 sessions on this Sunday afternoon program of the All Academy theme, plus another 150 sessions that I noticed in the rest of the program that used capitalism as one of their key words. All the management subfields are represented in this program, addressing capitalism's impact and meaning for individuals, firms, and countries, using a range of theories, psychological, sociological, cultural, political, economic, historical, taking perspectives on capitalism itself that range from enthusiastic endorsement to reformist skepticism to radical revolutionary transformation. We have participants from across the spectrum too, and wonderfully, I think, for us, the international diversity of the Academy of Management brings an enormous richness to our reflections on such a theme.